human dignity. And let's have a look. Preserving human dignity as a value in situations in which it conflicts with rabbinic prohibitions in the Talmud, rabbinic prohibitions. So, Jack, you're, as usual, top of my screen. Can we have line 6, please? The Talmud discusses.
The Talmud discusses the plight of someone who discovers shatnez in his clothing in the middle of a public thoroughfare. Is he required to divest himself of the offending garments there and then, or can he undress in the privacy of his home?
Okay, the question is clear. You discover. How you discover is interesting, okay? Probably somebody told you, you're wearing shatnez. Take everything off that's got shatnez in it, okay? The middle of, I don't know,
Subway.
Fifth Avenue, or in the middle of the Hauptbahnhofstrasse, whatever, okay? The idea, nothing
can stand in the way of obeying divine commands is pitted against the principle of kvod habriot. And the condition in the Gemara is that only rabbinic prohibitions retreat before the need to preserve human dignity.
In other words, you can override an isurim midrabanan, rabbinic prohibition, to preserve human dignity. Biblical prohibitions
must be observed, whatever the cost in terms of kvod habriot. Also mentioned are the two cases of returning lost property and the met mitzvah, in which kvod habriot relieves one of the biblical prohibition by virtue of a biblical exception.
So, I mean, I've given you a short version of the sugya. The sugya also talks about returning lost property if it involves you in an undignified situation. You don't need to do it because the Torah says, vehitalamta, okay? And you shall make yourself unaware of the lost property. And then in Met Mitzvah, there is a valachoto. So, generally speaking, it's only rabbinic prohibitions that override kavod ha-briot, and I don't need to say much more, except that the way the Gemara couches it is as follows, and we're going to have a look at the terminology here. Okay, Jean, would you read, please, from line 15? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. This is the Gemara in Brachot.
Amotzi kilayim bevigdo, poshtan afilu beshuk. Mai ta'ama, en chochma ve'en tvuna ve'en etza leneget Hashem.
Okay, so that's a pasuk from Mishlei. No wisdom, no understanding, and no counsel. What does leneged Hashem mean? Well, neged in the Hebrew of the Tanakh can mean at the side of. We remember we read that Esav, or we proposed that Elcha, Lenegdecha, which means I will accompany you, I will be next to you. That's one meaning of neged. The other neged can, of course, be that it is against. So you can choose. But the idea is rabot machshavot b'levish and va'atzat Hashem hitaku. God wants you to do it. You do it no matter what anybody else is going to think or what will happen to your image of yourself in the eyes of society or even in your own eyes. So from that pasuk, though, we learn kol makom, Jean.
Kol makom sheyishchilu l'Hashem, en cholkim kvot larav.
Now that means, and that's again got a background, but even if your rabbi happens to be committing a sin, you don't stop for a minute and you say, Rabbi, take off your shatnez immediately. Okay? And this is fairly graphic. Tashma.
Tashma, gadol kvot habriot, shedoche et lo ta'aseh shebatorah.
But then the Gemara says, but we learned elsewhere that kavod habriot is a great thing because it overrides a lo ta'aseh shebatorah. And then the Gemara says, Va'amai.
Va'amai, lema en chochma ve'en tvuna ve'en etza leneget Hashem. Targuma Rav bar Sheba,
Shaba,
Kameh
Kameh
de Rav
Rav
Kahana,
Kahana.
Belav de lo tasur.
Okay, that is about what we need to read at this stage. What is the love of Lo Tasur? Says in Dvarim, Lo Tasur mikol asher yagidu lecha yamin u'smol. You must not deviate from that which the rabbis tell you about the interpretation of the Torah, neither to the right nor to the left. So what we're saying is that the biblical prohibition, the mitzvah lo taseh, is the one about the obligation to listen to what the rabbis say. And then if the rabbis say that we don't mind, that mishum kevodo sharu rabbanan, line 20, that because of human dignity, the rabbis can say, you can ignore what we have required you to do and required you not to do, okay? So the rabbis have it in their power both to say you have to do what we say, but also you don't need to do what we say. So we have here a great precedent for saying when it comes to Isurim, Midrabanan, you can ignore them if the cost of not doing them is the loss of human dignity. Kavod ha briot. Then the Gemara gives us two cases which apparently involve isur, which involve mitzvot aseh of the Torah, lishchot et pisko v'lamul et beno, and then we say, and there is a met mitzvah. What do we need to do? Shevi al taseh shani. You can bury the met mitzvah. You don't need to do the circumcision of your son or shecht your korban pesach, because this is a shevi al taseh. Now, this is basic point in the whole of Shas and in law in general. What's worse, a commission or an omission? I didn't do it, or I did what was wrong. Now, what is worse is doing what was wrong. You murdered someone, very bad. You didn't pay your tax, not so marvelous, but many people have made a profession and made a lot of money by not paying tax. So the shevi al taseh is sit and don't do. So you can, for the sake of the dignity of the dead, which is a very important value in the Talmud and in Halakha in general, we can avoid biblical mitzvot aseh. But if it's a biblical mitzvah lo taseh, midoraita lo taseh, then we are not allowed to do it. Therefore, shatnez, which is lo tilbash shatnez, it is a biblical prohibition. You cannot avoid it, even if it means you have to strip off your clothes in the middle of a very public place. Okay? That's the conclusion, briefly, of the Gemara. Then the Gemara extends the discussion to stripping off shatnez clothing worn by someone else. Do you have to take the shatnez off another person? Say you see your rabbi walking down the street and you realize his suit is full of shatnez, and perhaps other garments too, perhaps his boggy trousers, Mickey, are full of shatnez, then you've got to tell him to take them off in the middle of the street. Really? Well, let's see what the Gemara says here, because it's very interesting. Amale Rav Papa la'Abaye, Maishna Rishonim didrachish lehu nisa, or Maishna anan dela mitrachish la nisa. It's a question, why did miracles happen in the past? We don't seem to see them today. We go back into the Gemara, Chonia Magel needed rain, stepped into a circle and rain came. These wonderful miracles apparently don't happen today. Amarle, so Abaye says, Kamai habu kamasri nafshayu akadushat Hashem. Well, the older generations, they would do anything, and they would injure themselves. They would give up their lives for the sake of keeping the Torah. Anan lo masrina nafshina kedushat Hashem. We don't have the same measure of dedication. Ki had Rav Ada bar Ahava. So now the Gemara says, well, look, there was a case involving Rav Ada bar Ahava. Chazei lahi kutit tahava levisha karbalta b'shuka. He saw that there was a kutit, which would be an Aramean woman or a Shomronit, but not Jewish, okay? And she was in the shuk, the public place, and she was wearing a karbalta. Now, a karbalta could be one of two things. The book of Daniel, we read that when Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were being taken out to be burned, they wore their fine clothes. The charbaltahon. So charbalta could be a very ostentatious garment. So you are advertising your womanly presence by wearing a stunning costume, okay? Which is not the modest practice of Jewish women. Or carbalta is associated with which animal? Which animal has a carbalta?
Chicken.
A chicken, thank you. A rooster, actually, a male one. It's the red crop at the top. So it could be that she was wearing a very bright red garment, okay? In any case, wasn't the sort of thing that Jewish women should wear. But what Rav Ada did was he took action. And what did he do? Savar Dabat Israel. He thought she was Jewish. And he rose. And he tore off her karbalta and put her to shame. Iglai milta de kutiti. Turned out that she's a kutit. Shimua barbameot zuz. They had to pay a fine of 400 zuz. And 400, as we know, all over Tanakh and Talmud, is simply a lot of money because he put this woman to shame and it was a mistake. So it's interesting. What do you think the story here is telling us about stripping off or stripping off someone else's shatnez in a public place? Is it supportive or is it not? People who wish to speak, of course, need to be unmuted, but is it supportive or not? What do you think?
If it's a woman, it's a problem.
Hello?
If it's a woman,
okay, Jean says it does support the fact that you can strip off somebody else's shatnez in the street. Does anybody have a misgiving about that? Is not so happy with that?
Yeah, wasn't he fined for doing it?
He was fined 400 zuz.
He was ready to pay such an amount for this mitzvah.
There we are. But he made a mistake, right? Perhaps the better course would have been to have asked her a question or two. All right? So, like many stories, like many cases in the Talmud, we have to sort of try and figure out what exactly is going on here. But it was seen that there is room for stripping off someone else's shatnez in the street, because that would make you into one of those people for whom God would do a miracle, although it might cost you 400 zuz. The one example we have is a mistake. So I'll leave you to mull over that, and let's have a look. Bernie, would you read line 29, a Talmudic case?
A Talmudic case in which it was permitted to remove a corpse from a house to a Carmelite on Shabbat because of the Kvod HaBriot.
Okay.
So what are we doing? Removing a corpse. So there's a...
Yeah. Removing a corpse outside of the house. Ahush chava dahava be...
Drukra?
Yeah. Derokera. Ahush chava, there was a corpse in Derokera. Shara Rav Nachman Rav Nachman said you can take it out of the place where the guy died, or the person. Amale Rav Yochanan Ach va damar bereid the Rabban al Rav Nachman Yitzchak Kaman Rabbi Shimon. It's like Rabbi Shimon who says that for every melacha she'nat tzrichal gufa you are patur. Right from a Masechet Shabbat, if you're moving, not for the sake of moving something to enjoy it, but you want to get rid of something, that's called a melacha, which is not for its own sake. Okay? And therefore it's not the melacha of moving according to the Torah, the one of the Lamatet Avot Melacha, it's not tiltul. Eimar de Patar Rabbi Shimon Mechiyuv Chatat Isura D'Rabbanan Mi'aika, but although you don't need to bring a Chatat, nevertheless it's Asur rabbinically. Amale Elohim. So he got the answer back. Rav Nachman said, by God, the Iyalta Be'at, you would carry the corpse yourself, you silly man. Afilu Rabbi Yehuda Shari, even Rabbi Yehuda, who says that Amlacha Sheinat Tzricha L'Gufa is Asur Midoraita, Demi Ka'amin La Reshut HaRabim, are you carrying the corpse out into the public street? The Carmelit carmelates to a Carmelit. Gadol kavod habriot shedochet lo taseh Shabbat Torah. This is an example again of an activity that honors the dead. Okay, you're taken out of the house and put in a special place. And also you don't want it to hang around, say to be nibbled at by various domestic animals. And you can do that because you're only transgressing a rabbinical prohibition. Now, what is a Carmelit? Very briefly, a Carmelit is 4 by 4 tefachim. It's a defined area. Tefach is about 10 centimeters. And it's not set aside for public use. It's not fenced in. It's not a Reshut HaYachid like fenced in. Could be a field, an empty lot, or a raised area in a Reshut. Harabim has to be at least 3 tefachim above the ground. So we are experts at finding Carmeliot. And therefore you can say that we could carry there because it's only forbidden mid-Rabbanan. So the Kavod HaBriot, the dignity of the corpse, the human dignity, overrides the rabbinical prohibition. How about bathroom trips beyond your Eruv? Can you take that? Ian, can we have the answer?
Which row?
Line 5, the idea that Kavod
Briot may override.
No, sorry, line 1, a concession made.
No, it's only one line then, right?
Yeah,
a concession
one line.
made. A concession made in relation to a bathroom trip in the context of the laws of the Eruv.
Now, you know that there is an idea of Eruv Tchumin that you can't walk more than 2,000 cubits. What's a cubit? Outside of your settlement, right? But can you step over the line if you need to have a bathroom trip? So the answer is, Aval Hotziu Nochrim V'Chazal Ladat. Don't need to pay attention to that, but it's somebody who has a problem, has to step outside of the Eruv. If you do that, you've only got 4 cubits maneuver. You say you need the bathroom. Here again, we see Kavod HaBriot comes into a halachic discussion and says it overrides. You can step outside of the Eruv out of your 4 cubits that you got, okay, because of the fact that you were thrown up by non-Jews and then you went back. You can go 5 or 6 if you need a bathroom trip, okay, to preserve your dignity. By the way, in the Agadah, or in the non-halachic part of our Jewish tradition, we encounter Kavod HaBriot all over the place, okay? One of the reasons, for example, when the special priest, the Kohen HaMashiach, Mashuach Milchama, tells the soldiers to go home before they fight, if they have a new house or a new wife or a new vineyard, and then there's the one who is afraid. And we don't call out each group and say, okay, the newlyweds can leave now, and then they leave. The newly planted vineyard people can leave now and then they leave. Okay, the new house builders can leave now and then they leave. And will all the cowards please step forward and go home? That we don't do because of Kavod HaBriot. We send them all packing in one shot. And there are questions or issues of Kavod HaBriot in the Agadah all over the place. But halachically speaking, it's fairly narrow. Okay, and it is defined, it is confined to an Isur Mid'Rabanan.
Mais שדוחה לא תעשה מדרבנן,
Just a second. Can we have quiet? Thank you. Okay. So, Aloma, I can hear you. So can everybody else. Okay. Now, the Yerushalmi puts it differently. It's very important to note, Yerushalmi is different. And it's quite dramatically different. Avi, would you read the Yerushalmi in Brachot, please? Line 8. Mahu.
First
First of all, it doesn't say the Kvod HaBriot, like the basic stuff of relieving yourself, not undressing in public, burying somebody who needs to be buried. We're talking about kavod harabim. In other words, we want to honor the public, okay? Tani.
אני, היו שם שתי דרכים מתאימות, אחת רחוקה וטהורה ואחת קרובה וטמאה. אם היו הרבים הולכים ברחוקה, הולך ברחוקה.
Now we
אם
could
לאו,
talk
הולך
about
ברחוקה.
a kohen who is biblically
Yeah.
forbidden to make himself tamei for a corpse. V'im lav, but if
אם
the
לאו,
rabbi,
הולך בקרובה מפני כבוד הרבים.
now then the kohen can actually expose himself to tumah, okay, which is midoraita, because that's where the public is going and that's where the greatest dignity lies. Ad kedon.
עד כדון בטומאה של דבריהם.
Okay, I mean, let's assume that this is only a rabbinical tumah.
אפילו
אפילו
טומאה
טומאה
שהיא
שהיא
מדברי
מדברי תורה, מה?
Just a second.
מן.
Avi, afilu tumah.
אפילו טומאה שהיא מדברי תורה מן.
In other words, what happens if we're talking about tumah, which is midoraita? Ma
מה דמר
Rabbi
רב זעירא?
Zira. This is what Rabbi Zira says.
גדול
Gadol,
הוא כבוד הרבים שהוא דוחה מצווה בלא תעשה שעה אחת. הדא אמרו אפילו בטומאה שהיא
Ra,
מדברי
afilu b'tumah she midivrei Torah.
תורה.
Rabbi Zira, the Yerushalmi, has a more open approach. It says that this concept called kavod harabim, I honor the community as a whole. And therefore, sha'achat, for 1 hour, I can dispense with the biblical prohibition. Now, this is different to the Bavli. And in terms of the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, there's a whole thesis here. If we examine the Bavli, and people have done that, Bavli is very rule-oriented. In other words, it's very much the sort of halakha we are used to in the communities we grew up in. Okay? If it's written in the law, Mishnah Brura, Aruch HaShulchan, then you have to do it. Okay? Whereas the Yerushalmi is much more interested in people, much more flexible. Okay? So this is a whole thesis, which I'm clearly not going to develop now, but it comes up nicely here in relation to the fact that Rabbi Zira and Yerushalmi says it may be possible that if you are going to be in a situation where the whole dignity of the community is going to be in danger by somebody insisting on obeying a Torah prohibition, then that Torah prohibition is put into abeyance for a short time. I mean, just putting an example off my head. Say you have an important delegation of politicians from Israel's strongest ally in the world, and somebody's meant to put up their hand because there's a woman in the deputation who wants a hand to be shook, and there's a very frum man who's accosted by this outstretched hand, and the result of not shaking the hand will be diplomatic chaos, okay? Then we'd say kavod harabin. That's how I understand it very briefly without going into this, okay? Kavod harabim sha'achat. Doesn't mean that you can say that you can always shake hands, okay? Maybe this is an Isur Midoraita, that's a Machloket, Ramban, but whatever it is, the cost has to be taken into account, and the Yerushalmi has this Kavod Harabim and Sha'achat. So, bearing that in mind, let's just have a look at 2 Rishonim before we move on to the next point. We've seen the Bavli and we've seen the Yerushalmi. How's the Rambam Paskin? The Rambam just takes the Gemara and he takes the extreme case of stripping shatnez off of someone else. Haroe Kilayim 14 Shel Torah al Chaviro. Afilu haya malech bashuk kofetz lo v'koro alav miyad. You tear the shatnez off. Again, I think that the Rambam is saying in terms of the way you learn the Gemara, what do you mean you discover shatnez in your clothing? Somebody told you. I mean, do you usually discover shatnez in your clothing in the middle of your walk? No, some hawk-eyed Jew, okay, who has X-ray vision, comes and tells you, you're wearing shatnez, take it off. So therefore, it must all be oriented towards someone else. Even if it's your rabbi. Imagine pulling off the Rosh Hashiva's clothes in the middle of the street. Amsterdam Avenue. Not sure how well it would go down. שאין כבוד לבריות דוחה איסור לא תעשה מפורש בתורה, ולמה נדחה בהשבת אבדה? And I talked about the two cases of returning lost articles and tumat hamet. You have a special biblical license for those. אבל דבר שאיסורו מדבריהם הרי הוא נדחה מפני כבוד הבריות בכל מקום. You can always override a rabbinical prohibition for the sake of maintaining human dignity. ואף על פי שכתוב בתורה לא תסור מן הדבר, הרי לאו זה נדחה מפני כבוד הבריות. That love of not disobeying the rabbis takes second place to preserving dignity. לפיכך אם היה עליו שטנז של דבריהם, how do you get to wear rabbinical shatnez as opposed to midoraita shatnez? Anybody like to suggest? What is rabbinical shatnez as opposed to biblical shatnez? Jean?
Maybe less than a dimension.
What did you say, Bernie?
Perhaps less than the minimum dimension to be called a beggar.
Shatnez is 2 threads, 1 thread of linen, 1 thread of wool, and shatnezed out. No, I heard a voice saying the clothes are dirty or disgusting. No, even if you're wearing disgusting clothes and the shatnez is shatnez. Number 1, the pasuk says lo tilbash shatnez. You must not wear shatnez. And then we have, if it says lilbosh, wearing, as a whole convention. If I take a jacket that's meant to be buttoned up in the front and I button it up at the back in a very unusual way, that's not called derech levisha. It's a bit like not eating. Okay, we have a definition of what it is to eat. And disgusting things, by the way, may not qualify as a prohibition on lo tochal nevela. I may be able to eat nevela if it's so disgusting that no human being would actually eat it that way. So if it's totally inappropriate wearing, it's called shatnez rabbinically. Because the rabbis come and say, never wear shatnez, even if it's not against the Bible, which says tilbash. Also, the idea is shatnez is defined again as a certain type of weave. Has to have the woof and the warp. And if it's a different type of weave, it's going to be shatnez midivrehem. So if you are caught in the middle of the street, somebody comes up and says, oh, you're wearing shatnez, quickly wear the garment in a funny way, and then you might be safe. But let's not rush. The Rambam is very clear about that. Okay, that if it's Hayashel Torah, Poshto Miyad. The Rosh. Robert Vassell, can you give us line 21, please?
And if it was a woman?
If it was the same thing, Ein Chochma, Vein Tfuna, Vein Eitzah, Leneged Hashem. No gender differentiation here. Every Isur in the Torah applies to men and women alike. Robert, your audio isn't on or something. We can't hear you. Robert Vassell, you're not being heard.
He doesn't have.
No hearing. Okay. See if you can do something about that. Ranon, are you there? Are you happy to?
Yes, I am.
Okay, the Rosh.
The Rosh, possibly in the spirit of the Yerushalmi, makes a distinction between Mezid and Shogeg in relation to biblically interdicted shatnez.
She'im
Adam roesh kilaim b'vigdei chavero v'halavesh kilaim eno yodea en lomar lo basuk ad sheyagia leveito v'mishum kvod habriot yishtok v'lo yafrishenu mishogeg.
Now the commentators wonder where the Rosh gets this distinction from. You are absolutely principled in terms of shatnez if the shatnez wearer is mezid. But if he's shogeg or she is shogeg, you don't need, you can wait. So the case, it's a combination of the Yerushalmi and a shed v'al taseh. Remember, I said that in terms of a biblical prohibition, like you're going to do a milah or a pesach, and then there's a met mitzvah, shed v'al taseh, so you can hold back from the accusation of shatnez, okay? And you as the wearer can also be spared until you get home. The spirit of Yerushalmi, that is kavod harabim, not to strip in public, and the idea that it's only a momentary thing, you'll get home, you'll take off the shatnez. So we have amongst the Rishonim a similar difference to the difference between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. But
what? I'm sorry.
yeah, sure. Yeah.
The Gemara, the text in the Gemara that we have, and apparently the Rosh has, does not say that you can take off somebody else's. Just as haroeh bevigdo.
Okay.
So that may be the Rosh rather than the Yerushalmi.
Right. Okay. So I said the spirit of the Yerushalmi because the Rambam would say someone else too. It is the same thing. So the Rosh, as I said, also probably seized the case of Rav Ada bar Ahava as not that clear cut. Rambam seems to have no problem with that at all. But the story itself, and I don't know if you can agree or disagree, I think the story itself has room for saying, you know what, might not be such a smart idea to take somebody else's shatnez off. So the Rosh could have interpreted that as being, b'mezid, b'shogeg. We have wiggle room when it comes to putting off someone else's shatnez. And then you could, if you want to push it, say, perhaps once that distinction between shogeg and mezid is brought into the picture, could you extend it to the person who discovers some of it, he or she is wearing shatnez, and then has room for saying, well, perhaps I didn't, perhaps because I'm not mezid, I was shogeg, can I wait until I get home? I'm not sure that that's what the Rosh meant, but certainly you could, in later sources, read that into the Rosh, okay? So you could start building up a case. In the case of something that's a real impugning of human dignity, namely removing one's clothes, which is, of course, basic lack of kavod ha-briot. So it's something to think about, but as usual, we are going to move on. And since you are at the bottom, I see, okay. Julian Liu, are you there? Okay.
Yes.
Would you like to read from line 26, rabbinic policy in relation to applying kavod habriot in practice?
This is on line 26.
Line 26.
The Talmudic concept of great is human dignity could potentially have been used to solve many conflicts between universal moral norms and halakhic prohibitions, but in practice it was limited to the Talmud to very basic affronts to dignity, such as garment removal and respect for the dead. This pattern persists in rabbinic literature, which also adopts fairly restrictive approach to the practical implementation of the concept, in the words of Rav Yair Chaim Bar Shachar,
the rabbi of Bachrach, in the famous picture by Rembrandt, but he was really one of the famous poskim, and he says as follows. I'm on to page 3. V'ani kohem ma'od, and I am very doubtful. Okay. I find it very difficult, actually. Koheh is I find it very difficult. Afilu b'midei derabanan, even in rabbinical matters, lomar dinidchem mipnei kavod habriot, bidvarim shelo nizkru bashas. And here again, we come across something we've come across before. If it's mentioned in the Gemara, you can do it. Not in the Gemara, much more difficult. And so, Rabbi Bachrach, 17th century, says that even when it comes to rabbinic prohibitions, כיוון דחזינן שאסור להוציא המת רשות רבים, אף על פי דקיימא רבי שמעון במלאכה שאינה צריכת גופה, עיין בר"ן, ראש פרק המצניע, וכן נראה לי, הטרוד יאיר חיים בחרה. Generally, the view of the rabbinical community is that kavod habriot is kind of dangerous, okay? Now, we did take it to the Rambam and the Rosh, and we saw that the Yerushalmi and the Rosh may be making it a little easier, but still, the Rosh's case, as was pointed out very correctly, is a case of stripping someone else off of their sharpness. And what happened was that generally we became much more bavli rule-oriented, and kavod habriot is not used widely to solve problems. And we'll talk about that as we move on. But we saw that in the Ramah. The Ramah's case of the orphan bride, what does he say? Rinana alai kol ha'ir. The whole city was talking about me. It was clearly, in his view, a rabbinical prohibition, not marrying on Shabbat. And yet, he took a lot of flack. So there is a basic inherent conservatism, a conservative approach. And you can understand that because if a rabbi was to start applying kavod habriot across the board, kavod habriot, human dignity, is not very objective and very narrowly defined. A whole class of people like women might say that Orthodox Judaism doesn't respect their human dignity, especially when it comes to the area of divorce. So what are you going to do then? So the best thing would be to keep it really under wraps and only apply it very gingerly. The Ramah was an exception on that score. So I don't know if there's anybody in the David Berman box who can or would like to read. So I've offered that, but I don't have an immediate response. So let's see. Stephen?
Yes.
I do. So can we have line four, please?
One of the rare exceptions to this conservative approach was the Ramah, as we saw in his responsa on the orphan bride. It is noteworthy that he included his permission to conduct the wedding on Shabbat in order to avoid impinging kavod habriot.
Impugning means to damage kavod habriot in the mapah on the Shulchan Aruch. Can we have it a little bit louder, Yael?
Velo mekadshim.
Excellent.
Haggah.
The Haggah is, of course, the Ramah. The Shulchan Aruch says you don't marry on Shabbat. What does the Ramah say? V'yesh matirin.
V'yesh matirin lekadesh heicha de'en lo isha uvanim. Rabbeinu Tam.
Exactly, Rabbeinu Tam. וסומכין על זה.
וסומכין על זה בשעת הדחק. גם כי גדול כבוד הבריות, כמו שרגילים שלפעמים שלא היו יכולים להשוות עם הנדוניה ביום ו' עד הלילה.
That's exactly the case, because there's a fight about the value of the nedunya, and it goes into Friday night. דורסין החופה.
דורסין החופה והקידושים בליל שבת, הואיל וכבר הכינו לסעודה ולנישואין, והבי ביוש לכלה ולחתן אם לא יכנוס אז.
shame for the כלה וחתן אם לא יכנוס אז.
ומכל מקום, לכתחילה יש להיזהר שלא יבוא לידי כך.
I should of course try and make sure that nothing happens there. Okay, so another issue to which he applied kavod habriot was permitting incontinent males to enter the synagogue to pray. If you're interested, have a look at that tshuva. But let's have a look at another instance when the Ramah is lenient in terms of kavod habriot. So Stephen Singer, would you like to read from line 14? According to the Shulchan Aruch.
According to the Shulchan Aruch, one may walk in a Carmelit on Shabbat whilst wearing pasul tzitzit and need not remove the tallit to which they are attached.
This is again another famous question. If you're wearing tzitzit and they are kosher, then you're doing a mitzvah and it's considered to be natural clothing. But if it's pasul, then you're carrying it, and carrying isn't allowed on Shabbat. Okay? But if it's a rabbinical area, like a Carmelite, then you can. The basis for this ruling...
The basis for this ruling is Kavod HaBriot. The Rama adds that this ruling also applies to a Talit Katan, and on the same basis, a person
Okay,
may
so you can keep your Talit Katan on. To take your Talit Katan off once you're told that it's Pasul would mean removing your shirt, your jacket, your tie in the middle of United Synagogue service on a Shabbat morning, not the sort of thing that you want to do. So you can keep it on. On the same basis, a person may don
a Talit Gadol, the tzitzit of which are pasul, so as not to be embarrassed at sitting in shul without his talit, since doing so may be interpreted as not being able to afford one, or worse, as a rejection of the mitzvot. The bracha over the talit should not, however, be recited.
So you come into shul and you actually have a pasul talit. So you really can't make a bracha. But that means, should you put it on at all? The Rama says, you know what? It's not nice to be sitting there when you always wear a talit without one. So you can do it. You can rely upon the fact that you're not making a bracha and nobody will know. By the way, I saw a tshuva not such a long time ago. Let's say you have a yortzeit and it's during the Omer, okay? And you forgot one of the days. But because you've got a yortzeit, you're a chazan. And everybody knows you've got your yortzeit. So up you go, v'hurachum. And comes to Tzvat Omer, they wait for you to say the bracha, and you don't. It's a bit embarrassing. So I think it's the Be'er Moshe, Rabbi Moshe Stern of Debrechin, who says that it's possible to rely upon the one view of the Baal HaMaor, that mitzvah midoraita to count also includes individual days, not only complete weeks. And therefore, to spare yourself the shame, you can actually say the bracha and count the Omer if you're a chazan with a yortzeit, and it would be embarrassing. So these things can be done, okay? So
Rabbi, is this a serious departure from the first example where we were looking to the observer to meddle in somebody else's over of the halacha? Right. And here we're talking about the actor himself.
Yeah, we have moved from the observer to the actor, okay? The Rama is very much keen on developing Kavod HaBriot as a general default for observant Jews who find themselves in difficult situations. The orphan bride, okay? The case of the incontinent man who doesn't want to be barred from shul, even though there are halachic considerations that would mean that you should not be coming to shul if there is a problem of incontinence, okay? This is the 16th century, remember? And also the fact that, are you allowed to walk around on Shabbat with pasul tzitzit, whether it's a talit gadol or a talit katan? The Rama is a leader in the expansion of Kavod HaBriot, okay? So that's the point here. And let's have a look at the Aruch HaShulchan too. But you see, all of this is in terms of Shabbat, and we're going to go into the use of handkerchiefs on Shabbat and see what happened there too. But certainly, the Rama, the Talmud is easier when it comes to Kavod HaBriot, when there's rabbinical prohibitions involving stripping in public, basic attacks on human dignity, or leaving a corpse unburied, okay? So it can be eaten by the birds of the heaven, or in some way attacked by animals, or other things which are like that, all right? But the Rama is an exception, although, and this is what I try to do in setting out this particular unit, that the Rama is much less restrictive than general rabbinical policy, okay? Which is manifested by, I could have brought 50 sources, by the Chavot Yair or the Chabes Yoir, okay? Who says that even if it is a rabbinical prohibition, we are not going to we're not going to apply Kavod HaBriot because Kavod HaBriot is too slippery an idea, Bernie, okay? You could apply it across the board in many different areas. So that's why I'm trying to hit, if you like, on the exceptional views. Let's have a look at Rabbi Yechiel Michal Halevi Epstein, the famous Aruch HaShulchan, who also deals with this sort of thing.
I can read now.
Hello?
I said I can read now. I'm on my phone.
Wonderful. You've made great progress in the last 7 minutes.
I'm on the phone, that's why.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Rabbi Yechiel Michal.
Rabbi Yechiel Michal Halevi Epstein. In his Aruch HaShulchan, Orach Chaim 2266-28, describes how one may remove muktzah items from one's pockets on Shabbat without impugning one's dignity.
Can we get this right, please?
I'm sorry. Impugning one's dignity.
All right. No impugning, just impugning. Good. Do you want to have a crack, Robert, at the Hebrew?
Okay. יש לדעת איך להתנהג עתה במקום שאסור לטלטל כשנמצא לו מעות או חפצים בכיסו, ועכשיו לא שייך התרת חגורה ובהכרח ליטול בידיו מהכיס איך יטלטל המוקצה בידיו.
Now this is interesting, okay? Because we learn that, and again, these are things that are quite quotidian. They happen like day to day. You come to shul, or you're going home and you say, wow, I've got money, I've got muktzah stuff. What do you do then? So then the old solution was, well, you drop your pants, because if they're in the pockets of your pants, you can't keep on walking. Now, that's not what we do these days, says Rabbi Yechiel Michal Halevi Epstein, lived in Navardok in the 19th and early 20th centuries. So you've got to do something. So what do you do? Upashut.
ופשוט אם יש לפניו אינו יהודי, יאמר לו ליתן ידו לתוך כיסו וליטול משם המעות וממילא יביאם אל ביתו.
Okay, so the first thing is the Shabbos going. I'm not sure how good it would look. You ask a handsome Gentile to put his hand in your pocket, okay, and start taking stuff out. Whatever it is, okay, that's the first thing you could do, a Shabbos goy. V'im ein
יהודי לפניו, אם ברשות הרבים, מחויב לפשוט בגדו בשוק ולנערם מכיסו, ואם מכרמלית וכגון אצלנו ברוב עיירות שאין בהם 60 ריבו, ולא מקרה רשות הרבים, וגדול, כבוד הבריות,
וגדול כבוד הבריות,
גדול כבוד הבריות, ילך לביתו ובשם יפשוט בגדיו ינערם.
Yanarem. So here, the Aruch slips in an interesting point. He says, look, perhaps we never have in our cities, certainly not in those shtetler in Lithuania, they never had Reshut HaRabim, a classical Reshut HaRabim, which 600,000 people pass, okay, a day. So if you're going to say that then we can say everything is a Carmelite, well, perhaps you can get away with saying that you can always go home and then shake out your garments at home. So what we have is a transition from the Gemara, which is concerned only with stripping and Tumat Hamet, and possibly refining, tearing someone else's shatnez off, to the machloket between the Rosh and the Rambam, the introduction of Shogeg and Mezid as a factor. But then we get the very quotidian, everyday issues that from Jews come across all the time, okay? How often does it happen to us that we do have posel tzitzis, okay? And should we be going around on Shabbat? Okay, there is a question there. It will be carrying, okay? Because it's not really a garment that you're wearing. It's not for noi. It's not a takshit. And should we be wearing a posel talis in shul? Okay, should we be taking it off and sitting without a talis? And everybody knows, you didn't check your tzitzis like you should have done every morning. Okay, and how did you make a bracha levatala and all that? or the Sfirat Omer example that I cited, or the Aruch HaShulchan who says that, if you happen to be carrying muktzah in your pocket, and that happens, happens a lot, not of course to the very, very particular and careful Jews, but to discover something muktzah in your pocket is not that uncommon. So what you need to do, Kevod HaBriot, is clearly a symbol for poskim to find you a way out, okay? So in that sense, whilst Kavod HaBriot hasn't been developed very well, you won't be able to go into a bookstore in Mea Sharim and buy, like you can on almost every halachic topic, all the rules of Kavod HaBriot. No, okay? But if you comb the halachic literature, you'll find that it is used when poskim need to. So let's have a look at the handkerchief, okay? Very interesting. Jack, are you still there? Line 31, the hygienic use.
The hygienic use of handkerchiefs, which is certainly a matter of Kavod HaBriot, began apparently in Italy in the 16th century, and the question of taking one out on Shabbat was discussed by halachic authorities. The Yisrael Bar Eilenberg from
Gorizia,
Italy,
criticizes the practice.
So we find in the Tshuvot in the Be'er Sheva of Rabbi Eilenberg, who was he was
a Talmid of Rama, no?
He was a Talmid of the Lavush and of Rabbi Yeshua Falkatz, okay? And you see his dates from Poland. He was born in Poland, actually. He was also a Kabbalist. And he became the rabbi of the Friuli region in northern Italy. And a major Italian posek, was a teacher of Rabbi Azaria Figo, if you've heard of him. He moved to Prague. Eventually, he died in Moravia, but the Be'er Sheva is very highly respected. And he also wrote a famous book called Seidal HaDerech, a commentary on Rashi. Now, he says that Rabim Noagim Lahakel, many Italian Jews, they would be lenient and they would walk out with a handkerchief on Shabbat in their pockets or somewhere on their person. Shemekanchin Baha'af, a way with which you would clean the nose. Shekorin, which is called fazzoletto. Anybody know they're Italian? Fazzoletto is a handkerchief. Ve'ino nachon. Now, Eilenberg doesn't say it's asur. So you have this tremendous sort of surge in Italian niceness, okay? How can we possibly sneeze onto our sleeves or sneeze onto the ground? It's disgusting. So therefore, we all have to go around with our fazzoletto. Rabbi Eilenberg says, you know what, there could be a problem here, eino nachon, but he doesn't have anything to suggest as to what to do. But other Italian rabbis do. And so let's have a look at the Shiltei HaGiborim. Avi, can I get you to read again, please?
In Shiltei HaGiborim, Shabbat chapter 6, the leading Italian rabbi and posek, Rabbi Yoshua Boaz.
Okay, now what else did Rabbi Yeshua Boaz write beside the Shiltei HaGiborim, which are comments on the Rif?
Ner Mitzvah.
Very good. Jean en kamocha. Ner Mitzvah. And actually, he wrote Torah Or,
and also
Ein Mishpat, Ner Mitzvah on ever since 1550.
And Shiltei HaGiborim on the Rif, no?
That's the Shiltei HaGiborim is on the Rif, but he wrote the Masoret HaShas. That's Torah Or, Ein Mishpat. Ever since 1550, your page of Gemara has a compendium of everywhere in the Shas in a particular sugya is mentioned, and if you have a pasuk where it comes from, and in the Tosafot, you'll know whether a daf like Kiddushin Samachet is Amud Aleph or Amud Bet, there's 1 dot or 2 dots, right? All that was done by Rabbi Yeshua Boaz Lebet Baruch. He was a tremendous baki, knew his Shas inside out, okay? And of course, his Ein Mishpat is limited to the Rambam and to the Smag, and later printers commissioned rabbis to put in the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. But the Ramah, of course, refers to him as Hagot Alfasi. And Jean, do you know what's his most famous psak in the Shiltei Hagiborim? He was the first one who paskened that a woman can wear a pe'ah,
Nochit.
a sheitel, and still, even if it's her own hair, and still fulfill all the requirements of going out with a kisui rosh. That's probably been the most famous psak of the Shiltei HaGiborim. Rabbi Yoshua Boaz.
Boaz lebed Baruch.
Okay, so now, what does he say? Rules that
it may be taken out into the public domain, provided that it is stitched to a regular garment. Rabbi Boaz's ruling in his mapa.
So you can stitch your handkerchief to your garment. So, Avi, can we have the Hebrew, please?
וכן מותר לצאת במטפחת שמקנחים בו האף שקוראים הצולית אם מחובר לכסות.
Okay, so you have to stitch it to your garment. Robert Vassell, it is noteworthy now that you learned to read.
All right, there we go. It is noteworthy that Ramah does not add the condition mentioned by Boaz, namely that there must be a general custom in the place to sew the handkerchiefs onto garments.
Now, this, of course, accounts, remember all the gentlemen who came to shul with the breast pocket handkerchief, right?
Right.
If it's sewed, you could use it as a handkerchief, okay? So perhaps there's a connection, I'm not sure. And it's interesting to note what happens later on. 8. Ranon, would you like to read subsequent halakhic authorities?
Subsequent halachic authorities dealt with various aspects of stitching the handkerchief, including the number of stitches required, the position of the stitched handkerchief on the garment, whether or not tying the handkerchief to the garment would be sufficient.
Perhaps you could tie it, and the number of knots required, etc.
And so on.
So look at Bach, the Taz, the Magen Avraham, all very fascinating.
Stitzer.
A stitch, okay? But then you can also tie, perhaps a kesher, but it's making a kesher shel kaima before Shabbat. All of that is the poskim full of that. That was the fashion. So we began by talking about the fact that it's probably not a good thing to do, but Rabbi Eilenberg couldn't really say it's asur, to the fact, well, yes, let's stitch it. Everybody's aware that it's not acceptable these days to clean in Italy, to clean the stuff that comes out of the nose with your sleeve, or just let it fall to the ground. So we have the stitching approach, but then we have another approach, okay? A different practice. Ian Taylor, you're on line 12, a different practice.
A different practice is dealt with by Rav Elijah Shapira, 1660 to 1712, the author of Eliyah Rabbah, who cites the custom of the young men to tie the handkerchief around their legs whenever they went out to the public domain. It's getting ridiculous. Rav Shapira is prepared to permit this practice in Ta'iliyah on the grounds of Kavod HaBriot.
Okay, now the Eliyah Rabbah, there's also an Eliyah Zuta, cited often by the Mishnah Brura, was a very important halachic code, and we're talking about the 17th century. As a Dayan Rosh Yeshiva in Prague, okay, and he wrote his commentaries on the Lavush. Anyhow, important source for Ashkenazi halacha. He says, yes, you can tie it around your leg. And again, because of kavod habriot. And other hygienic practices which you might be adopting, and therefore you could, again, you're not going to be very sur midoraita by tying it around your leg. What's interesting is that Rabbi Shimon Sofer of
Erlo.
okay? Rabbi and Rosh Yeshiva. Julian, would you like to do a little more reading? Loud and clear, please. But you have to be unmuted. Line
Is this
18.
the Erloi that we have here in Katamon?
Yeah, exactly. They are the followers of the Khatam Sofer, Erloi. They're not Hasidim, actually. They are Misnagdim in the Khatam Sofer style. Julian, you are muted, so we will not hear you. If you can unmute. Okay. You're on. Line 18, Rabbi Shimon Sofer.
I'm looking for the line.
18.
Rabbi Shimon Sofer, Rabbi and Rosh Yeshiva of Erlo, Hungary, grandson of the Chacham Sofer, was sensitive to the Kavod Habriot aspect of the handkerchief and also permits tying it around the leg. He writes as follows in his Responsa, Itoret Teshuvah.
Itorut Teshuvah 2, number 160. By the way, he was rabbi of Erloi for 64 years. And he was 95 when they took him
in
Auschwitz, and he died within days, okay? But Erloi in Katamon is in fact that he set up, let's just read. He's very graphic. He says, look, we don't have people wiping their noses on their sleeves or with their hands, and throwing the resulting liquid onto the ground. This is disgusting, both for the person who's doing it and for those who are watching him. Pshita, shayach bazeh mishum gadol kavod habriot. So gadol kavod habriot applies. Hagam shuchal lilbosh hamitpachat al tzavaro. Now, question is, in the summer, okay, so what they did was they put it around their necks. And I remember from Stamford Hill, people who would wander around on Shabbat, okay, they'd tie their handkerchiefs around their necks, making it into a kind of a necktie. Once you've used it, though, it's not kind of a sort of necktie you'd want to sport. Im hu yotzei ben abriot karuchat savro bakayitz, and then it looks like a scarf in the summer, very odd. Havikchucha va'at ve'atluna, object of scorn and derision. V'yesh bazeh mishum gadol kavod habriot. So you tie it around your leg. אבל אין להשתמש בהיתר זה באופן כללי, רק במקרים נדירים שאירע לפעמים, but don't use this when you have a cold and you have a runny nose, שצריך לצאת חוץ לעירוב ולא באופן קבוע, and if you have an Eruv, of course, there is no problem. I think we're going to end up with the Shabbos belt, and we'll leave Rav Ovadiah's response on Pidyon Ben and the Balat Shuvah, who has a dubious past, for next time. That's an exciting topic. So who knows what we will be discovering. But let's, what is how the Mishnah Berurah put it? Mishrotzeh liyot ha-batshilet imo. If you want your handkerchief with you, v'lo tefaro lahaksut mibod yom, and you didn't stitch it into your garment. En lo heter she'aseh ata mimenu ke'en chagura lachgor bo. You can't just simply use it as pretend it's a belt and put it over your existing belt. The chagura al gabe chagura asur. We don't wear two belts. Okay. Ela yichabe rosh hafatzilet berosh hachagura baniva. You should make the handkerchief part of your original belt. Chagura ruka, like a long belt, v'yachgor at small bore, and use the handkerchief as a loop in which to put the end of the belt. And therefore it is actually a genuine belt part. Okay? Kozman sholech birchov. V'yesh me'acharonim shemafakpakim b'zeh v'sobrin d'kesher she'no shel kaima lo mahani. Okay? Lazeh, some say, well, that's you have a proper knot and you do it before Shabbat, then you can't. ועל כן לכתחילה טוב לשאת עצה זו גופה מערב שבת, אינו בקשר של קיימה, לחגורה, and you make a proper Shabbat belt, יחשב כחגורה ארוכה לחגור בה בשבת.
בשבת.
So just we get caught up in the technicalities of the Shabbat belt, or tying it around your leg, or your neck, or stitching it. But the whole idea is kavod habriot. In other words, the rabbinical mind understands that there is something disgusting about not having a handkerchief, and that therefore halachic practice has to accommodate the handkerchief, and therefore kavod habriot does in fact play a role almost as a meta halachic principle. And we're going to see examples of that, and then we're going to get even more outrageous when we hit the Dor Revi'i, Rabbi Moshe Shmuel Glasner, and his very unique approach to the use of kavod habriot in order to act as a counterweight to serious halachic prohibitions.
I see.
Okay. Yeah.
I see that it says that you can carry avnei kinuach for wiping your backside on Shabbos, right? So nowadays, instead of avanim, you could use tissues. And if you're already carrying tissues, you can use one of those to blow your nose.
Aha. Well, the tiltul avanim lekinuach is again a tiltul in a Carmelit. We're not saying you can carry them in the Reshut Harabim. Now, if you can carry them then you might as well carry the handkerchief, because stones and handkerchiefs don't do the same thing. Okay? And again, if you want to go back to the practice, Romans and Greeks, and we'll sort of not get too deeply into the stone thing. But of course, toilet paper does become a problem because of the tearing aspect, which is why we have cut
I said tissues.
Paper. But let's say you don't have cut up toilet paper. What do you do?
On Shabbos itself, you tear it where the perforations are not there.
Exactly. You tear the non-perforated part, so it's not a malacha, not melechet machshevet. It's not sort of an intelligent way of doing things. It's an unintelligent way. But if you want to show that you're Shabbat observant, but you need to do something for your human dignity, then the legal mind says do it unintelligently. And then you'll be announcing to yourself that it's Shabbat and I can't do something which resembles what I do in the weekday, but I can do it because the end result is more important, okay? And I have to have this in order not to become disgusting both to myself and to the rest of the public which surrounds me. So, excellent point, okay? All right. So
all the authors until the 19th century, they had no Reshut Harabim. It was any street was a Carmelit. There was no. You must wait for New York to hear about the Reshut Harabim.
And as you know full well, Jean, not everybody accepts that. Okay, so again, it becomes a default. Why do we go to so much trouble when we set up a Ruvin? You know, we could say simply it's a Carmelit. So
Carmelit is auch gam kein asur Carmelit.
Right, okay, but I mean, you need more than that, okay? So, but when you're pushed, as always, when you're pushed against the wall, you say, okay, I will get the most lenient view. And then I will, because there's something else like Avodah Briot, in our case, that says, okay, you know, we can say, like the Aruch HaShulchan said, well, actually, you know, most of our places we live in, according to the most liberal view, are all Carmelites because we don't have 600,000 people go, except, of course, for the possibility of Fifth Avenue or a street in New York, which is actually Homer. But there are many, many views on the way. So on that note, I wish everybody a very good evening. Next week, we're going to do the fascinating Tshuva of Rav Avad Yosef, the case of the Haredi wife with a Avar Mupukpak, a dubious past, and then we'll move on to Rabbi Moshe Shmuel Glasner, the Dor Revi'i, and then we move on to guide dogs in shul and various other fascinating topics. And we'll also talk about Rabbi Breish from Agudas Achim, the famous
In
Yaakov,
Zurich.
Chelkes Yankiv. Okay. A very good evening to all. Laila Tov, Erev Tov, bonsoir, gute Nacht, and stay
Good
dry and
evening.
warm for those who are in Byron's path.
Sabach al khair.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Good night.
Bye.
Good evening.
Good evening.